moment, we should be on air, theoretically. Very theoretically. Can anyone see us? Okay, wait, now probably there is like a setback or something, a delay.
Yeah, we have to have our
oh, no, it's starting, it's loading, it's loading.
Machines.
Okay, so I just want to know that everything is fine, and also it will probably start blasting into my ears. So I better mute, because I have it on. Hi, everyone! Hi, this is like the first hangout after I got completely destroyed by my community guideline strike. That wasn't even my video, it was a guest video. So, hi, everyone! We're back in making hangouts and streams and stuff. I don't know. I'm horrible at this. Why don't you say something, Shifty? And he's gone. Hello.
Hi.
Yeah.
Fancy. No, this will be cool. I've been excited to talk about this for a while because this kind of goes up in my multiple ways, my education. Hello. We have a third party here.
You know what? I think you should turn off the video that's playing in your background, Shifty, because you may hear it through the video and through what I say.
Ta-da. Fixed. We're good.
Oh yeah, first question, obviously. Nah, maybe second question. Is logic there? And no, logic is not there. I mean, he's technically there, he's physically there, he's in the other room, but he's not awake. He's still in slumberland. So no, he's not there. Okay, so we wanted to talk about the robot who got the citizenship in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, it was interesting though, because I think the only reason that this is making such headlines is because of Saudi Arabia's horrible human rights track record. Because this has already kind of been discussed a bit in the EU. But yeah, just conceptually, I think it's an awesome topic, and we can go to specifically the issues with the KSA if you want. But.
Yeah, no, the one thing that really got me from this whole having a person get the citizenship is if you are a robot that looks female and you get the citizenship, are you now counting as a female and do you have to cover up? Or can you just go around as a robot and just not care about it?
Right. So that's one thing I was looking at is they don't, so far, they haven't had to cover up. Or I should say she. There's only one, but one interesting thing about that.
Isn't it? It's like the technical pronoun because it's a robot.
Yeah, I don't know. But I thought that was interesting for a couple of reasons. So at first I wondered if it was kind of like a workaround for like the sort of religious restrictions, you know, so like the temptation stuff and all that in Islam. It's like, well, it doesn't technically count because it's not officially a person, like a human.
Okay.
But it's interesting to me that they, like if you look at the words that the people at this tech show used to describe her, they're adjectives that you would use to describe a person, you know, beautiful, that kind of thing. So it's obvious that people are getting some kind of sexual feedback from this. And that has some interesting implications as well.
Yeah.
Okay. For me, it was like the biggest thing was it seemed like human nature was kind of overtaking their religious ideologies.
Yeah.
It was like kind of showing through in their language.
The one thing that really got to me, because I have seen this before, like in several documentaries where they were showing that, for example, there are these mines and they have these machines to not get the people hurt, to dig up the mines, right?
Right, yeah.
And those people get so attached to these, you know, robots, to these machines, that instead of using the machines, they're still doing it themselves.
Huh.
And that I found very, very fascinating, because in a sense they give, you know, social attributes to the machines and everything.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what it was. It was similar. It made me think of how like there's working dogs in the military and the police, and it provides like that social bond with the human. Um, you could see that in a few ways. So like in the military, they have uh, bomb diffusing robots for like IEDs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And eventually, like over time, if they keep using the same one, the soldiers would like bond in the sense that they would have a sense of empathy with the machine. It was interesting. It's like it's moving. It kind of does things for me. Like it makes you wonder what in the brain makes you go, oh, that thing's kind of with me and on this whatever this adventure is.
Okay, I need to turn this off. Just give me a sec.
Sure.
That's about the last thing I want to happen. Total silence there. So, good. Yeah. No, what does a machine have to have in order to be a person?
Yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking to start off with is, well, we have to first of all agree on or come up with an idea of what it means to what personhood is. Um, just some things to me I had were sentience, so sort of like not just awareness of your surroundings, but self-awareness. A big one was the capacity to suffer, and along with that comes desires. And sort of the last sort of peripheral thing, but I still think it's important, is to have the illusion of autonomy, because that contributes to the perception of self. So in the same way that like human beings don't really have autonomy, this sort of misconception of it or the illusion of it still has an impact on your behavior and how you think. So that's kind of the rough sketch of what I came up with for personhood.
Okay, quick question to the chat. Are we both audible? Are we both clear? And is someone too silent? Should I put the volume up? And a question to you, because that's the thing that I always have a problem with when people ask me, how do you actually know if people have, or like if machines have sentience or if they fake sentience, like in a sense? How do you program sentience into a machine?
Well, I think I mean, you could define it in a couple of ways, but I think the sort of most clear-cut way would be just similar to the Turing test. So like if we can't tell the difference in their capacity of awareness, or maybe it's bidirectional. Maybe if the machine can't tell the difference between its sentience and ours, and vice versa, then I think we're good. Because self-awareness seems to be the biggest thing.
Yeah. Yeah, but also I like that you pointed out the idea of pain, because it's very easy for us to make machines who don't feel anything and maybe eventually potentially have actual sentience.
Yeah.
Right. So that part, I mean, and even if you look at humans, there are certain humans who just, at least physically, don't have any kind of pain reception. Usually they die very early because they hurt themselves too much. But overall, it's very easy for certain people to not feel anything because of a genetic whatever. And so those people wouldn't feel anything either, but you would still call them a person.
Right. But I would say that's more likely because it's a sort of close enough thing. It'd be weird to say they're not a person, but I don't know. You would definitely say they're inhibited in some way. But yeah, no, the reason I listed the capacity to suffer, there's all kinds of things that come from that. A big one for me is, so like one of the first things I had to do when I was starting my ethics education was review this article. It was talking about scientists were looking at a way to genetically engineer cattle so they wouldn't feel pain. So when you would slaughter them for food, it wouldn't be suffering. And so the argument, you had to argue whether or not that kind of solved the problem of sort of animal cruelty and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And my conclusion was no, because they still have desire. They may not have the capacity to feel pain, but they would probably still desire to be alive. So you still kind of have that going on, even if you get rid of the pain element. There's a couple things that lead to that too that we can talk about in a little bit if you want. But a lot of it was like really interesting things. So like if you apply the concept of suffering to humans, I would say that's the core of the purpose of having rights.
Mm-hmm.
And that has interesting implications on things like slavery or free speech, things like that. So we can really take that a lot of different directions. It's a can of worms.
Yeah. The thing that gets to me is like, imagine getting to the point where you have the robot who has sentience, who has desire to live, who has senses, because it's easy to build them in. And then realize that the vast majority of other robots are basically brainless slaves working around. I mean, I don't know.
That's interesting.
I wouldn't want to be that robot.
But would it really be all that different than, say, us and lower animals?
Who knows? The question is, how do you perceive other robots then as this robot?
Yeah. So like, I don't know, let's say chimps, since they're so close to us.
Yeah.
You do kind of read into their behavior a little bit like human stuff, but I don't really like find it disturbing or anything that they're, say, out in the wild in harsher conditions than we are, or something like that. I don't know.
Well, but partially, isn't that also partially the fact that you're not necessarily in direct connection to them?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Like if you, for example, have a pet dog.
Right.
That dog is so much more important to you than dogs overall. But if you have that dog and you really bond to this dog, you tend to be much more sympathetic with other dogs. So now you go on the street and someone shouts at the dog and you're like, oh, poor doggy, and stuff like that, because you have a dog. But people who never have a dog don't really have this kind of reaction often.
Yeah, that's interesting. So like that's kind of like the social bonding thing.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I'm wondering how this plays into, so like it's the same thing with people. Like if you personally know someone, like a friend or something, it kind of works the same way versus like a stranger. So I don't know. I'm not sure what impact that would have on robotic behavior.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, because this is like a physical thing, but it doesn't have to be. Like it doesn't have to look human, this specific one in the KSA. And this one's not that advanced, by the way. I looked into this, and it's more of a sort of like a publicity stunt to attract people to this tech show. But I don't think it should be sort of written off as that because of the things we're talking about. Like it's important to discuss this because these things aren't, I don't think, as far off as we may think they are. So what would you say the reason persons need rights, like in the first place, human beings?
Can you repeat that question?
Sure. What would you say, like big picture, the reason behind human beings having rights? Why do humans have rights?
Well, it's good that they have rights, but why they have rights is a very practical thing, seems to me. Like, for example, when you look back in old Rome, in antique Rome, the longer they had the slave and the closer they were living with the slaves, the more the slaves got rights over time.
Right.
And then you had, like, you know, a huge, you know, cultural mess up, where then you had Christianity moving over, and then you had again a huge disconnect from farmers to, you know, rich people. And then eventually, and the farmers were basically slaves. I mean, it wasn't missing much, especially the peasants. And then eventually they got more rights again, up to a certain degree, and they got more so there is something in human nature that gets us to the point where we constantly try to give humans back their rights. It may not be as developed in the older days as it is now, and chances are that with every heavy dogma we get reset back to zero, but there is something with humans that just wants them to have the rights.
Yeah, I could totally see the reasoning behind sort of like the equality type perspective, but I'm thinking more of just as a concept. So like just in general, why give rights to humans? Like why do we need the concept of rights? And that's kind of where I was going with the suffering aspect is, as far as I can tell, that's the only reason rights exist ultimately, is to prevent or reduce suffering. I don't know do you agree with that, or?
You know, it reminds me of Sam Harris, The Moral Landscape, where he says we should basically focus morality, we should make a kind of objective morality and focus it on the minimization of suffering.
Right.
But that is not the full story. For example, as a free person, like if you take, hypothetically, if you take a Roman who has a slave, and that slave is actually decently off, but the slave is obviously not free. And then you take a person who is not as well off as the slave, you know, doesn't get as good food, doesn't get this kind of clothing, has to work for himself, has to do stuff, but he can decide over his own life. The free person, in my personal opinion, even though from a qualitative life standard, that person is worse off, that person is actually better off because there is a certain freedom extra to it that, you know, that gives the person, that gives the own person more value. I don't know how to say this.
I think I see what you're getting at.
Yeah.
So there's sort of like an odd inequality in level of freedom between the two, but there's still like even the still like the limited rights of the slave.
Yeah.
There's still rights. So like, you know, their right to food or whatever you want to say, shelter.
Yeah.
So sure, one has a different kind or a better version perhaps than the other one. But it seems that no matter the level, the purpose is to, in some way, alleviate suffering or prevent suffering.
Well, I'm not necessarily sure about that. Like, if you cannot decide over yourself, you're not necessarily suffering.
Do you mean
but
like,
you don't like it?
Yeah, so I understand the priority of things. So like, you know, personally, I wouldn't like being the slave because I value my autonomy more than the possibility of not surviving, but other people may not. So to me, not having my autonomy would be psychologically anguishing,
Yeah.
like as a form of suffering. So yeah, I think it'll vary from person to person and situation, but I do think no matter what level or degree, it seems to be directly tied to suffering in the human condition. But I'm thinking, so you kind of hit on one thing I want to talk about was, so like a common thing that's brought up with this is the economic implications.
Yeah.
And one thing that I was thinking about is the idea of slavery. So if these things, these robots become sentient to the point where they're essentially persons,
Yeah.
but we have them working for us, let's say without pay, does that count as slavery? Is that morally impermissible?
Whether they have the choice to work for us. I mean, if
Right.
we have them at the point where they are sentient and they're working for us, I mean, it's like it's the same thing as when I can bring up something completely slightly off topic. But if you look at things like BDSM, where you have people who willingly go into the role of slavery, and even in their real life, in a sense, where they're like, yeah, I do exactly what you tell me to do and nothing else.
Right.
That is what they willingly do. They decide to do this. But if they do not have the choice, then it's a different thing, right? And so you would have, for example, the possibility that there are robots who are like, I don't really need anything. I kind of like it here. I work totally for free for you. But they ought to have the choice, right?
Right. Yeah.
And the moment they have the choice, there will be robots who say, don't want this kind of lifestyle. And so you will have a huge financial problem with that. And I mean, there are many people who, for example, do not have a job right now because of the fact that their job, or the job that they would kind of operate on, is taken somehow by someone else, right? For example, many factories have the machines working, where before there were people working. And even though it's a very nasty and horrible job, because you always do the same movement, there are a lot of people who would rather work there than not be employed. But
Right.
they do not really have the choice because there are robots working. But the moment the robots would be able to choose, wouldn't there be like a shift again, that you would have more people working in again, that it would be cheaper up to a certain degree?
Yeah, so I was thinking that's interesting. So you kind of be replacing or reintegrating robots in the same way that humans used to be before they were sort of not as sentient. So like right now, robots that like say assemble cars.
Yeah.
Um, nice. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, because I was thinking just from a sort of stability standpoint or even a national security standpoint, um, you have to keep your populace satisfied at some level.
Yeah.
So that so I talked with I think I had a brief exchange. I'm trying to remember who it was. It was between Lang and someone else. I can't think of it right now. But I was asked, do I think uh, do I think it's inevitable that there's a sort of uh, like allowance or whatever you want to say globally to humans just sort of to survive? Um,
What exactly
sort
do
of
you
like,
mean?
yeah, well, I think there is for sure because even without the robotics, but especially with robotics, like more and more humans will not be needed to complete tasks,
Yeah.
which is going to lead to like as far as I can tell, just from looking at how things work now, in order to sort of mitigate any negative factors that may come out of that, you're going to need things like shorter work weeks, and increased social services to keep your population essentially happy and stable.
Yeah.
And you could kind of see it a little bit in Europe at different parts where they have shorter work weeks. That's partially why.
Although
Let's say,
with
let's say the
Europe,
United
they
States.
have again the problem that when the populace gets too high and people are not able to afford enough money, even though you have higher services, you will end up with the problem that the people can still not afford each other.
Right. So that's something you really have to be careful with. So I think the transition period, depending on how it goes between um, the sort of lower level robotics versus the more sentient AI type stuff, that's going to be probably really rough or difficult unless it works out in a way that I haven't thought of.
Yeah.
I could see it easily being a sort of bizarrely discriminatory situation,
You
which
know,
ironically would kind of validate the idea of them having personhood.
yeah. The one thing that I'm always worried about is, I mean, whenever you have a certain group of people, at least, you see that, for example, in places like South Africa, where first you had the apartheid, and then they basically, switched that. And now basically the people who actually were supposed to be in power of their own country are back in power of their own country. But now they have all this, anger and fury stashed from the older days, from the older generations. And so they will go after the people who nowadays can't really do much about it. About the fact, like, for example, in South Africa, you have a lot of white people escaping to, for example, Netherlands or Belgium or other places because of the fact that it is dangerous to be a white person in South Africa.
Right.
And that is something very upsetting when you think at a certain point you could have that the robots figure out, hey, you're treating us as second-class citizen, give us the rights, and you give them the rights. And because they're superior in strength and everything else, because they're robots, they may as well go and give their, thank you in a very nasty way. So that is something that is worrying me a lot.
Yeah, I'm thinking that, so if the robots, let's say, are sentient enough to desire rights, I mean, even if we ignore the fact that ultimately we were the designers, so we should watch out for this stuff. If they were strong enough or superior enough in different ways, then they wouldn't need our permission. They would just have them. And if they weren't, then they wouldn't be strong enough to be a threat to society.
But isn't that partially the problem with how you think? Because the reason robots would be sentient is because of the fact that they have enough computational capability to think a certain way. And they have a certain, software or program that tells them, you're sentient and whatever else. So if you have a program that's running, I mean, isn't it a bit like with us with religion, where you have religious people who are perfectly logical in vast majority of cases when you show them something, basic. But then as soon as it goes into their religious ideological thing, they just go completely off script because they have the bias, Because if you really think about it, humans are a kind of learning machine with a program. Our program is just not that good. And so if you have a robot, you could just well end up with the kind of robot that doesn't quite figure out, hey, you know what, I'm so much stronger. Why don't I just eliminate every human being? Because they're dealing so much with human beings that they don't really come up with the idea. And instead you will have them go, yeah, so humans have this thing of, freedom and equality and end of apartheid. So we should totally try that because reasons. I could see that robots would not necessarily figure out right away that they're, stronger. Not necessarily because, they aren't or because they wouldn't be capable of, but there could be a scenario where they just don't figure it out.
Yeah, or even if they do, they wouldn't desire it. So everything we know is from culture, and it comes in so early that you can't even really tell where it starts. And I would imagine I don't see why it wouldn't be the same case for sort of high-level sentient robots. So in the same way that we're pattern seeking and we behave based off of collective behavior from the cultures we've lived in or currently grow up in, I don't see why that wouldn't be the case with AI at that level. So sure, you could tell, in some way you could inform it what it's like to be different, but in the same way that humans can't, they can be told what something's like, and it's not the same type of knowledge as it's not experiential knowledge. So it's like you can be told what a slum is like, but if you've never, say, been to one or even lived in one, you're not going to have the same experience or understanding that someone who's just been told about it did. So I'm wondering, why would they even have the desire to sort of overpower humans? Like, it's such a popular concept in just pop culture and media, and I never understood why that's like the go-to is like they're going to desire to sort of destroy us in some way. Like, why think that?
Because we programmed them.
Yeah, but why not benevolence? Like,
yeah, because
why wouldn't they be
benevolence is
grateful?
something very, like, I mean, I don't want to be nasty, but humans are so tribalistic. Benevolence sounds good on paper, but it's not necessarily something they would teach a robot.
Sure, but what I'm saying is, so like if these things are high enough to where they can learn on their own, right? Like a child, you don't have to teach a child benevolence. It kind of stems from empathy and it figures it out from observing the culture
Yeah,
around
but
it.
do robots have empathy?
Yeah, so that's where I was going to go is I wonder if they would pick up on that
Yeah.
from, I guess it depends on how you introduced the robot into the world. So like the reason that humans can sort of have these base level say emotions and other things that make us who we are is because we have this sort of long gestation period and uh, or short gestation period and long sort of growing up like external to our mother's body and in the world compared to other animals. And it's gradual. So it's not like click, you're on as a full adult. Now figure out the world or whatever. So like you get all these sort of experiences with guidance and sort of interacting with them that you wouldn't get with like if you just flicked on a switch, so to say.
Yeah.
I guess it depends. I mean,
Like the thing is, if you wanted how should I say, an ethical component to a robot, you would have to program it before you actually turn that thing on.
I would think so. I mean, if you're going to immediately like introduce it full sentience to the world and not gradual like a human would, then yeah, I would think that would be the case. In fact, one of the first um, sort of academic level philosophy papers that I've ever read was about robots and ethics, and that's what really hooked me into ethics as sort of the subdiscipline. And it's not so much what we're talking about. I mean, partially, but it was more about how we would interact with them and would they have the sort of same ethical standards that we do and that sort of thing. But one thing that I'm thinking about now is so there was some news out not too long ago, and some people tended to kind of balk at it, but if you really look into it, it's interesting. So it was shown that even machines can sort of show biases against or towards different demographics. Um, you know, even software. And so a lot of people laughed at that, like, oh, how could a computer or whatever say discriminate or whatever you
Yeah.
want to say. But it wasn't that the computer was deciding to do that or even subconsciously in some way doing it. It came from the people that created the computer and the software unknowingly.
Yeah.
They didn't do it on purpose. So I'm wondering how
But
that would play into the
like
creation
that's
of it
my
as well.
problem that I had with what was it, Candid, but they said like, yeah, it's a filter and it's a learning machine filter, and I was thinking by myself, well, that will go well, especially with the bias the people had who were producing it, because those people, if you just were listening to them for a few minutes, you know exactly what kind of people you are dealing with. So
Yeah.
obviously those people would have an extreme bias and they would kick off their platform the people that were basically driving their platform at first.
Yeah, and it was even more subtle than that though. So like let's say let me see if I can come up with an example. Okay, so like even if to you hypothetically it makes sense. Let's say you're trying to decide between hiring a man and a woman for a job that requires physical labor. Just based on vision alone, like seeing the candidates for the job, you're probably going to favor the male just because of their muscle mass compared to the female. But you don't know. You could be wrong. The
Yeah.
female could be better. Um, but that's just kind of what you're going to think, just as a generalization. And it's not in like a hateful way. It's just kind of a reasoning thing. But that's the sort of thing I'm talking about that would show up in this sort of software level and even beyond that. So I'm
Yeah.
thinking like we can't avoid culture is so strong that it impacts everything Like
Yeah, but
it can't even get out of robotics.
think about it like this. Physically, like the thing, when you have a job and you need someone to do the job,
Right.
then you need the physical strength. So you go for the stronger person.
Right.
Saying that it is a social thing, it's not quite correct, because it doesn't need, you don't need to have any kind of cultural background to understand that men are stronger.
No, I understand that. I'm thinking
So
like
I can't quite follow what I'm trying to say.
Sure. You'd have to, I mean, it's a long chain of causality, but ultimately, so like the reason we know that muscle mass is an advantage in, say, manual labor is because we were taught that by other people. And the way they know that is the same thing. It's so like in the same way that like you can see like an isolated community like creationists who all they've ever known is creationism. They have no idea what evolution is, or maybe just a vague concept of it.
Mm-hmm.
So like that's only their culture has only been that. They don't know anything else. So that's what they think. So that's what I mean is ultimately we're informed by it.
So basically, it's more a restriction thing. It's not really a discrimination thing. It's more a restriction. Your culture restricts you in how you think about certain things because it kind of molds you into one direction or another.
Exactly. It's the same way. It's sort of like a macro version of, so like if you have curation in say like a music streaming app or, you know, your videos on YouTube, you know, hey, you might like this based on your other watches. It's going to narrow it down more and more and more unless you deliberately search for something that is at least related, which you can't do. You can't like come up with something you can't think of. So you have to really just as much as you can spread it out, you know, when you're trying to take in information, but ultimately you're beholden to even your sort of internet culture, if you want to say it that way. So like I'm a liberal and I read a lot of liberal news sources, and I go out of my way to look at conservative sources to just kind of understand perspectives and, you know, maybe get a different take on things. But if I were to say not do that and just go on a news feed and it's going to curate the news I read, hey, you like news publication X or story X, here's more like that. It's I'm going to get isolated mentally really fast. And so that's where I think that we have to really be careful with.
Yeah.
With it.
You know, it's also silly because especially search engines, I mean, especially Google, if you think about it, Google doesn't really give you a lot of variety. Google kind of looks what you like and then will just expose you to that.
Right.
And so
exactly.
The more you're just like focused on what Google feeds you, the more you will narrow down what you're actually exposed by.
Exactly.
If I want to find new YouTubers or new stuff or new content or something slightly different, I have at least two different accounts with different preferences, so that the computer thinks that I'm a different person, so that I will get exposed to different stuff. And I get what you say about the news. And one of the things I've noticed is that every news source, no matter how factual a fact seems to be or a claim seems to be, there is always a taint to it. There's always a, you know, even the way they say the most common things is
Yep.
skewed. And so I've just started to read the same article in every different paper that I can find. You take the same article or the same topic at least, and then you look through the New York Times, and then you go to Breitbart, and then you go to, I don't know, Washington Post. You go everywhere. You just go everywhere because it's fun.
I have like 5 different ones that I do that for. Yeah.
And you will see how the topic suddenly changes and how the things suddenly are so much different just because you have a different paper in front of you. Where first it's like, yeah, the car is attacking, you know, and then it's like, no, this ideology-driven whatever person, and we have to stop immigration. And then you go to the next one, and it's like, yeah, we should stop invading the Middle East. And you know, it's And this is all because at the end of the day, a guy jumps in a car and moans over people. I mean, the guy jumps in a car and moans over people. That's the fact. That's all there is. Everything else is just doesn't even belong there.
Yeah, and it's always like often it's not even that the differences or sort of slants. I hesitate to call it bias because sometimes that implies intent, but it's not always that way. So even just like the subtle wording. So like one of the first things I got out of my education in rhetoric and sort of like language analysis is exactly that. I would read a news source and just immediately it hits you is like the way they word it, even if it's not like a complete different perspective on it. So like even something like active versus passive voice.
Yeah.
So
but they
basically
like, say, yeah, this guy killed that guy, or that guy has been killed by someone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's
absolutely
interesting. You can't avoid it. At some level, it's going to exist. That's actually why I don't know. I still kind of do this because it's a little bit different now. But for the longest time, the reason I liked the BBC as a news source is because it tended to start off the article with just basic bullet points of facts, and then it would go into sort of the narrative of it. So it kind of helped like mitigate the actual like human filling in of however you want to describe it.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's something I'm worried about, especially what level it gets to. So like again with the creationist thing, the example, you can't look for something you don't know exists. So if it
you
gets
can't
to that
actively search
level,
for it, you mean?
yeah. So like if that's all you know, because I've run into people that have never heard of evolution, which is mind-boggling, but they exist. So like they couldn't go look it up because they don't know about it. So
but wait, they don't even know that there is something like evolution?
Yeah,
I see.
I know it's weird and kind of scary.
You live in the US, everything is possible.
Right. I've met people that do not know what atheism is. Like not just the concept, the word.
Well, that could happen.
Yeah. And I was blown away. I'm like, you haven't heard of this at all. Just like they didn't have a concept. It never even entered their mind that it could be a possibility that there's no God. So that's my worry is the sort of curation effect on AI.
Yeah.
How are we going to sort of, as human beings that have our own perspectives and narrow focus from our cultures, going to try at least to give AI a broader spectrum of the world so it doesn't say favor heavily to one thing or another. So like that's one big reason that discrimination or bigotry exists towards any demographic is because you're informed in one way only, and it's very easy to sort of otherize that other group or demographic. And that's probably not something you want from super super intelligent thing.
Yeah, clearly not. Yeah, and something that I have also worried. I only get secondhand the news from the US.
Okay.
I don't see what it's like in the US. I've never been in the US.
Okay.
The only place I have been physically is Canada, where I can see these kind of things. And something that I have noticed is often when you see the news from the left and the right, it seems that the people split up more and more and more. They get more tribalistic.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And
it drives me nuts.
And it's like, guys, why are we going back in time? Why?
It's this obnoxious trait that came in handy a long ago and it's still around. Like I did a stream with Carrie on Duly Noted. I think it was the last one we did actually, the most recent one, where I was talking about how there's benefits to tribalism, how it helped us survive and things like that. And there can be still upsides to it, but it is really obnoxious when people don't realize they're doing it in a sort of deleterious kind of way. So like I can't stand it when I'm trying to read something in like a political story and immediately like within a sentence, politician X finds a way to blame party that's not X.
Yeah.
It's like, why? Why is that the go-to?
Yeah.
Could we not just like talk about this objectively? It drives me crazy.
Yeah.
But you can see that everywhere. And yeah, that's a problem. And it makes you wonder too, would AI or robots want to be tribalistic?
Yeah, but that's the problem. If they get basically programmed by people who are tribalistic, there is a
Exactly.
chance that they do get tribalistic. And they
That's
will
what I'm
get
thinking.
tribalistic against humans because humans are the other tribe. And yeah, Psycho 216, I'm only one tribe, the failure tribe. I love that one.
I just noticed that. I'm so bad at not looking at the stream, but that's hilarious.
Yeah, no, I'm keeping an eye. Sometimes it seems like I'm not listening and stuff, and it's just not true. It's just because I'm listening and reading at the same time, and I'm just too slow to answer. Yeah, no, with artificial intelligence, I think because of the fact that we try to replace ourselves more and more with artificial stuff. For example, we try to they have learning machines where they use brain cells connected to chips in order to make, I don't know, cars go towards walls and stuff like that.
Right.
I think the combination at the end of the day will do the trick. And if we get to the point where human and machine, because there is so much machine in humans, like if we get all robotic, if we all get robotic arms and robotic bodies and robotic digestive systems or even something else, I don't even know if we would get to the point where we would have the issue with machine versus human, because I don't necessarily know that there would be much human left at that point.
Exactly. That's what. So I think you and I talked about this, and I know I've talked about it in a couple different fora, but I don't see AI as this sort of separate thing. I see AI being the convergence of humans and technology to the point where it's this sort of cohesive blend,
Yeah.
and it's advanced enough that you can't really
Someone
sort
in
of.
the chat pointed out genetic manipulation, where you basically want to well, nearly something like eugenics, where it's not negative eugenics, but positive eugenics, where you actively want certain genes to be favored and stuff like that.
Okay.
And I was thinking, if you take something like eugenics, which, you know, was a very, very scary thing back in the days, and nowadays we don't, you know, we obviously don't breed, you know, superhumans with it, but we use it, for example, to develop certain insects that can kill other insects, or we use it for certain antivirus bacteria or whatever. So we do use this kind of technology for our advantage. I don't think it would be far off to say that eventually chances are that we would use this kind of technology to improve our own standards, to get rid of sicknesses, but also to make it easier for us to merge with technology.
Absolutely. So like the human body is such a piece of shit. We're so fragile, it's ridiculous. So like,
okay, just sorry, very quick interruption. Everyone who would replace their bodies with a robot body, type 1 into the comments.
oh yeah, I want to see this.
I want to see that. Okay, so you're saying?
I mean, just think about pretty much any function of our body. It's inferior to things we've developed. So like our bone structure, like bones and bone marrow, I mean, yeah, they have things that we need, like different cells, but like flip that aside, the material, it's terrible compared to say something like some alloy of, like a stronger metal or something like that. Our vision, our eyes suck unbelievably compared to like the technology we have with even lenses, let alone other living things that we could copy like octopus. I mean, there's so many things about our body that are inferior already. I don't see why you wouldn't. I would.
Yeah.
I personally would rather have a better functioning, say, artificial heart or pacemaker or whatever, than a normal heart because it'd be superior. I would be less likely to have a heart attack, etc. So I don't see why not. I don't see why people wouldn't use that to their advantage to at least enhance, if not replace.
There's one thing. which is the way we perceive things. If you have, right now at least, if you have a robotic hand, an artificial hand, that hand can, for example, give you signals, inputs, you know, for example, it can send you the signal that there is pain or something like that. But right now it's not at the level of having the same experience as having a real hand. So I would see people being like, I want to be like a genuine person because I want to have genuinely these feelings. And I think the complete core point where it boils down to, at least for a certain amount of people, is experiences, emotional experiences that are high on their, you know, I like level. For example, is it good to eat chocolate? I don't really want to stop eating chocolate because I just really like the feel of eating chocolate. So if there would be this kind of I don't know, feedback, this kind of sentiment for a robotic mouth, or not necessarily even needed a mouth, but like if you would have this kind of artificial, you know, feedback towards your brain, chocolate would disappear as a help thing. So I don't know if I make the point. Like if, you know, there are, for example, in the chat there was someone who said, yeah, he wants to have a meat body, a meat artificial robot body. And I'm thinking by myself, what it boils down to is, you want to be able to have sex with your partner and enjoy it just as much or even more. So if we manage to make robotic bodies that are just as capable of having sex as human beings and even feel better about it, probably we would have a lot of people on the robot train.
Hold on, I got to recover from that. My concern is, so I agree that that's sort of how it's going to be, is it's going to be more of a convergence than rather two completely separate things, humanity and, or humans and non-humans. But I still wonder, so like you were talking about how there's going to be people that will say things like, I want to be, you know, whatever, they view humans as sort of how it should be or whatever, and probably religiously informed. That's a concern of mine, is, are people with sort of enhanced bodies going to be, you know, sort of discriminated against or outed or whatever you want to say by those that have that view?
I really recommend playing the video game Deus Ex.
Okay.
Especially because like the whole, like I think it has like 2 or 3 even different ones. And basically what it is the one that I was playing was I don't know which one I was playing. Anyway, with Deus Ex you have this thing where you have like a person with robot parts, and you have the people without it, and you see basically how this developed. And not in the first, but in the second game that they brought out, I just don't remember the name exactly. In the second game, you have this whole disconnect where they tried to, you know, push the robotic people all in a corner because there was some technological thing that went bad. And so those people are dangerous because someone can take them over via the internet, you know, their minds, and make them do horrible stuff, or they can damage their whatever chips they have in their brain and then make them do horrible stuff. And that's why people who do not have this kind of enhancement are afraid of them. And so they start to like segregate them. And it's actually very interesting because it has a lot of parallels to the real world and actually gives a good, you know, idea about how it could look like.
Huh. Yeah, that sounds, I'll have to check that out, because I'm aware of the game, but I've never looked into it. I don't really know much about it, but yeah, interesting. I do think it will play out that way. We have to be careful.
Deus Ex Machina.
Right. Caught out of the machine. Yay, Latin.
You know, wait, I have it there. Just let me. This is so convenient. You know, I always forget that I'm not sitting in front of the computer, but that I have a laptop. And so I can just walk around and have a look at Monsignor Logic's games. So let me see. God, he has so many games. You can't even play them all.
have games from like my childhood, like the first Wolfenstein. That's the kind of games I have.
No, I just can't. I can't find it. I cannot. If I have only one hand, I can't find it. I'll send you a PM. Actually, let's ask the chat. Who of you guys knows what I'm talking about? What game I'm talking about, or at least what's it called? I know they know. I know they know. Some of them knows.
Let's see.
Someone of them knows. Yeah, Deus Ex what? Deus Ex is just like the first part.
Okay, so there's
Diabolus
Mankind Divided.
Deus Ex is just the first part. What is the second part? What comes after?
There's one that says Mankind Divided. It kind of looks like it.
Oh, that could be it, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it looks like in the description.
Nice. Okay.
Interesting. I'll have to check this out.
No, it's. I really liked it. I really liked it. I enjoyed it a lot. As a concept, you know, the game not that much because I'm not that good at it. I always let logic play and then I pretend like I did it. But yeah, no. As a concept, that game was actually very, very good.
I'll have to look at that. That's interesting. I had so there was only a few other things I was thinking as like key points for this specific situation. Where is it? Oh, so like the whole rise of the machines thing that people joke about, but are also simultaneously afraid of. I'm not concerned about that. I guess a big reason is we can see even without machines. So there's research in epistemology, the theory of knowledge, subdiscipline of philosophy, that has a very simple formula for making decisions, and it's better at making decisions than humans. Even when humans operate it, like humans can be told, this is how you use it. And
can you break it down? Can you explain it to us?
Well, it involves some symbolic logic, so I'm not really sure how I would say it, but
okay,
it's similar to the way you would calculate statistics in certain situations. So you create variables for the decision, the choices you have, and it basically involves some simple addition and multiplication, which are the same thing, but it's to the point where we don't even need a machine to do this, except for the fact that even when humans are given the formula, told how to use it, they still do worse than a machine does with the same formula.
Because they have the bias or something?
Yeah, because they're flawed as humans. It's crazy. So I'm not concerned about it. I'm thinking they're going to be more
to robots.
The professor I had for epistemology always was like very jokingly but serious about being pro rise of the machines because they would make better decisions than human beings. and I do kind of see the point. I mean, you know, they may not be in charge of us necessarily, but even then, why not think they would be, say, benevolent dictators? I mean, at the very extreme level, you know, of them being in charge of human beings' lives, they'd still be better at making decisions. So
yeah, but you know,
people are willing to like
problem with, you know, being better at making decisions doesn't necessarily mean that you're, you know, making good decisions for someone or something else.
Well, it doesn't have the sort of personal component to it, which is why the sort of the humans given the formula did worse. So yeah, I mean, it gets really complex with desires and things like that, but when it comes to things like is it safer to, I don't know, let's say you're in a car that's, you know, automated and there's some kind of mistake where there's a person in the road or something like that and you need to swerve. You're trying to decide as a human, do I swerve left into oncoming traffic and maybe make it through before they hit me? Or do I swerve right and try really hard to avoid the person walking that direction? the person will do worse every time exponentially at making that decision versus a machine doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So some things like that, not like I prefer red drapes over purple one. You know what I mean? Something like that.
Yeah. No, I get it, especially because, you know, computers are partially just quicker.
Yeah,
and also, like, you know, if you really think about it, there is this I don't know, this weird picture, this where it's like, you know, 5 people on one side and 1 person on the other, and you have to pull the lever or whatever.
Oh yeah, that's Philippa Foot's trolley problem. It's a classic in ethics.
And where eventually you have the problem of, like, will you throw the one guy down to stop the train and then save the 10 people and stuff like that.
Yeah, the fat man. Yeah.
Where even though it's very unlikely that would actually, you know, ever be the case. I mean, who is that massive to stop a whole train? But let's assume for a moment that would work.
Right.
Probably the computer would choose, okay, I want to save lives. I want to save the 10 lives. Therefore, 1 life has to go. Possibly. And then there would be many people saying, like, this is a very, very nasty decision, because from our perspective, it is a nasty decision. You have killed a person. But then from another perspective, it's actually not that nasty of a decision, because at the end of the day, you know, you have actually saved more people. So I don't know if it's necessarily good or bad to have computers decide, so don't say.
Well, I guess I don't mean good or bad in the moral sense. I mean in the sort of successful sense, like on a sort of calculating level. So like in the trolley problem example, probably, I mean, who knows, depending on the programming, right? We're back to this again with humans. Yeah. What the decision would be, but it could be more complex. Like, you know, what are the chances of, say, you know, the 1 person becoming the next Einstein or something versus the 5 people that don't, you know, things like that. And, you know, it's a thought experiment, so you don't actually have to, like, worry about time.
Yeah.
But that's another great way that technology is better than that. Like, the human brain is terrible at math.
Yeah.
I mean, just think about a simple calculation that you can do on like a graphing calculator.
Yeah.
Versus your head. Like, what? It's not even close. And that's like really old technology. So, yeah, there's all kinds of reasons to think that. I would imagine, though, that in the trolley problem, artificial intelligence would think like a consequentialist and save the 5 versus 1 person.
Yeah.
As opposed to most people,
yeah,
like including myself.
But that's the thing, you know, you
like
could say that our brains are just like not working that well, because we would basically kill more people than we would save.
Exactly.
But there would be many people who would feel very upset about it. And chances are that if the robot would decide this way, that there would be people who would get upset about it and be like, you know, I don't want the robot to decide for me anymore, and like make uproar and everything.
Yeah, that's a great way to have social upheaval.
Yeah.
Here's while we're talking about it, here's an interesting way to sort of look at the trolley problem. So I'm a deontologist. When it comes to ethics, I think intent matters, motive matters, and there's no value that outweighs another value on, say, a human life. So to me, it doesn't matter which way you throw the train. They're still like equally impermissible ethically.
Yeah.
So here's a different way to look at it, though, because a lot of people will tend to answer that problem like a consequentialist. They'll think, you know, just statistically, 5 people are, you know, better off alive than 1 person is. They'll think something like that.
Mm-hmm.
So if that applies to you or whoever's listening, consider this. So let's say there's an emergency room in a hospital, and they're extremely busy. They've been slammed long enough to the point where they're running very low on staff and organ donations. And then you have 5 people brought in from a bad accident. All of them need a different organ transplanted within, whatever, an hour, or they're going to die.
Okay.
And the hospital doesn't have those organs. And then in walks a guy for a checkup who's perfectly healthy. Would it be morally permissible to, say, kill that guy and take his organs to save the 5? It's the same situation.
It's so weird because I would completely I'm going completely off script there. I know I'm not supposed to, but I'm always thinking like, okay, so if there are like all these people who die, the one who needs the heart is probably the one who dies first. You take his organs and you're fine.
Right.
Because he died. So, but I'm not supposed to think that way. I'm supposed to actually solve the puzzle. It's just the
Right.
moment you think that, it's kind of hard to get back to solving the puzzle.
Yeah, you got to stick with the givens. That's a very common thing. It's like people would love to alter the setup. It's like, no, I know it's a rough decision. That's the point.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And about the Einstein thing, there we have also the problem where, that one person where they would throw basically the fat person down.
Right.
That one person could very well be an Einstein, right?
Exactly. You don't know.
But what if you knew that was Hitler, and then suddenly a lot of people would actually throw the poor guy down.
Yeah, I mean, if you have that sort of insight, that's different. But
it's no. But even if like the moment you change it a bit, where it's like, yeah, it could be the next Einstein.
Right.
Obviously, people would jump like, yeah, let's just not kill the guy. But if he would, announce something like, yeah, well, he could be the next Hitler instead, they would be much more tempted to turn down.
Right. They would change their mind.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, wait, what happened to your system here? Right.
And I don't know. I mean, I absolutely understand though, because we came actually to this topic, we came through computers are better than humans when thinking about this.
Yeah. Well,
it is clear that maybe we need a bit of artificial help here with solving our more debacles here.
Yeah, why not think it could aid us in our sort of ethical perceptions of the world? Why think it would be a problem?
Yeah.
So, yeah. Ethics
is there a way?
Is extremely important. Oh, that's all. I was just going to say it's extremely important.
Is there a way to give someone the tools to not be that much influenced and narrowed down by culture?
I don't know what that would entail, because,
like, for example, is there a thought pattern, a way of thinking, or a way of acting that makes it more easy for a person to, not just stay in the setup he was or she was born in?
I think the best thing you could do is kind of what we were describing earlier with the way we read news, is just constantly expose yourself or to the other person to as broad of a spectrum as you can on angles on things.
Mm-hmm.
But like when it comes to learning things, that's probably not going to be a possibility, just for like, well, for one thing, the way people learn, you have a limited amount of time to grasp certain concepts before you will never get them. Yeah. So like if you want to see a really interesting video on how culture informs everything about you and how early it comes in, you can find it on YouTube. It's this Russian woman named Oksana, and she's a feral child. She was a feral child. She's older now. She was literally raised by wolves and dogs. And it's, when you watch it, it just blows you away, because she like drinks water out of a spigot like a dog would. Like, it's for real. She's not like thinking about this as a decision. It's like you and I would think to drink out of, say, a cup.
Okay.
it's crazy. But so like that's how early and powerful culture comes into people's learning abilities and views of the world. I mean, and because she's older now, and that was how she was raised, she's permanently like that on some level. They've tried to counter it, but it's not the same. And it shows it in the video, sort of like the best they could get her on like learning and understanding things that most humans do. So I'm not really sure how effective that would be, other than if you were lucky enough to say encounter the person or yourself already sort of with the basic capabilities of the human beings today. And then you can sort of counter the sort of leaning thing with the opposite worldview, say, kind of in the way that you could like counter someone who, I don't know, let's say, well, even let's take religion. I mean, why not? So, like me personally, the way I was raised secular, not atheist, secular. Um, and the way it was always explained to me growing up was I got the full spectrum of belief in the world. It was always these people think this, these people think this, etc. And I was never told what to think. I was just basically given the smorgasbord and shown how to think about it.
Okay.
So I've always been an atheist in some form or another, but I think that's the best way to do it, if that's a possibility.
Talking about religion, Siki, do you want to join the hangout?
Come on in.
Now we have to wait. Is there like a 30-second delay or something?
Yeah, I think that's about what it is. By the way, real quick, so this kind of is a good segue to this. There was only one more thing I wanted to mention when it comes to AI and sort of the advancement of it.
Yeah.
I'm wondering what impact it would have on the view of what it means to be a god. So, like, we're creating these things in our image, mind you. Especially if they're superior to us in abilities.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can't help but wonder, not just like what we think of conceptually as a god, but specific religious people and their systems.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, it'd be a reason to oppose it, but how would it affect their view of what they can conceive of as God? Like, wait a minute, we're doing the same thing that this book says my God does.
Yeah.
What's the difference? I would think that would seep in at some level.
I was wondering, because basically we are creating these machines,
Right.
and we are not at all on the level of these machines. The moment we are able to make artificial intelligence as such that they are actually able to, act like a sentient being, they will be so far beyond with their capacity to us that we will not have the ability to actually monitor them or check on them, right?
Yeah, we'd have to watch what ability we gave them in the first place and try and predict that.
Yeah, and the one thing that always got to me was the way, especially the old scriptures and like, let's take the Bible.
Okay.
The way the Bible describes this God makes this God a childish version of an adult, more or less.
Right. Huh.
The one argument that always got me, was, what if God is more stupid than us? The same way we are more stupid to computers. What if there is a God, but he's just a dumb fuck? And that
Right.
argument got to me. It really did.
Huh.
I did not know how to answer.
That's funny, but it's interesting to think about. Wow, I've never heard that. That's a possibility. I don't see why not. I suppose that could affect non-believers' views, possibly, of God. I'm gonna have to write that down. That's a good one.
No, that's the one that got me thinking. Because I had this issue with divine everything. And there are many who are like, yeah, if God would be so perfect, he wouldn't do this and he wouldn't do that. And it's not true that God has to be perfect. The way he's described in the Bible, at least if that would be the God we're talking about, then it is a stupid God. And so that was the one time, because first, when I was on the religious spectrum, let's say, I was a complete anti-God person. I was like, I totally have to make sure that without God noticing, very secretly, very without him seeing it, I have to make a pact with like Satan to make sure that I end up at Satan's place, because this God guy is like a maniac. I don't want to deal with this guy. And then at the point where I understood, this is all just nonsense. At that point, the one argument that got to me was that one, where it's like, that would have made so much sense. And I wonder if I would have heard that argument before, when I was still a believer, would I have actually changed my mind?
Huh. Or would you want to worship a dumbass? I guess I don't know.
But that's the thing. It's not always about just like, worshiping the person. I mean,
sure,
you can worship whatever you want, but if you believe something exists or doesn't exist, that informs your worldview. If you believe that there is a God, and then you come to the, reasoning that is actually a very stupid, crazy God, then you come up with ideas of, okay, how they teach this poor little Goddy over there that he shouldn't throw me to hell, like the thinking changes.
That would get you out of a lot of sort of logical dilemmas as well. So like, or even something simple like the problem of evil.
Yeah.
Like that would get you out of that. You could just attribute it to stupidity.
Yeah. No, that's a saying we had a long time in the Logic household. Never attribute to malice that which can be attributed to stupidity. And the reason why is, from at least my perspective, it is more indignant to the person to be like, you just didn't understand. You were either ignorant or you were stupid about it, or you just like were silly. That to me is just a higher way of seeing a person than to say you are a vile person, you're a vile bastard.
Sure. Yeah. Why jump to that?
Less harmful than vile, than evil. So that's how it ended up.
That's I can't get over it. That's hilarious. Like, why do you make these horrible decisions? Oh, right. You're an idiot. Okay, you're still God. So we have someone joining us, you said?
No, he didn't want to.
Oh, okay.
No, it was interesting because like this guy, it's the one I made the UFO reply to, right? And he constantly tries to show me all this evidence. And even though he, he's very far off when talking about this kind of topics, I am so fascinated by the way this guy thinks. And I really want to have him once in the hangout and just hear what he says. I'm so fascinated. And I know it's bad. But that's like, everyone has its horrible, how should I say, carcasses in the carpet or somewhere. And my bad habit is that I really like to figure out how people think. It's a very, very bad habit.
Why is that a bad habit? I like that.
Because, but like sometimes you can get yourself quite into trouble because of it.
Did you say carcasses in the carpet, by the way?
It's right? Bad habits, carcasses in the carpet, yeah.
Interesting. I like it. Haven't heard that.
Yeah, it's a weird way of saying it. I don't know where I picked it up, but some foreign language, and it's just like a verbatim translated.
I'm looking it up. Everything keeps talking about Beatles. I don't know. But yeah, what did that? I'm trying to remember what this. So that first article that I was talking about that I read in ethics, I'm trying to remember what it termed this concept of ethics and robotics, because it mattered in like a distinctive kind of way, and I can't remember it. It had something to do with non-human, or no, artificial moral agents. That's what they called it.
Artificial moral agents?
Yeah, is how they refer to it, to sort of generalize, because it's easy to get bogged down in the more specifics of, like, say, the difference between like an actual robot versus software or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's a good idea to start as broad as possible, theoretically, conceptually, and at least in philosophy, and then you go, you narrow it down if you have to.
Yeah. No, and also every computer, no matter if it's just a robot or a software on a computer or whatever, every single of those devices, they need to have the software for it. Just having the hardware doesn't do the trick. At least not now.
Yeah.
So,
no, this is a classic argument in tech. I'm with you on that one. There are people that say that we don't need the hardware, and some of the arguments are convincing a little bit, but I think ultimately you need the hardware.
Well, the hardware, in a sense, is the capability, right? The hardware is needed to process what you're thinking.
Right.
It's it's like when we think that we're thirsty and we want to drink water, we kind of need a hand to put the water into our body. But if we can automate that, we don't really need the body to put the water into our body, right?
Sure. Well, I'm talking about.
It's a very, very simplistic way of saying it, but it boils down to that. At the end of the day, the software and the program and all of that is what it's needed. The hardware is only there to make that stuff work, to make the software work. And obviously, depending on the hardware, you may have restrictions. For example, I mean, if you have a very old computer, certain software just won't run on it. Or if you have a certain, a certain setup in your computer, then certain calculations just won't work that way. But overall, it's usually just a matter of how quick and how efficient you get the software to work.
Right. So, like, usually this topic is discussed in the sense of, like, AI, just specifically, not as something like a functioning hand or something like that, but just strictly thinking ability.
Yeah.
But even then, so, like, the closest thing I've heard to, like, a successful argument that you won't even really need hardware and it's dependent on softwares, you're gonna need at least a way to store the software.
Yeah.
Bare minimum. Because there's a lot of software now that can replace hardware when in calculating things. So, like, virtual machines is a perfect example.
Yeah.
Or even, like, a lot of graphical processing that used to require higher levels hardware can be partially handled by your operating system. That kind of thing.
Okay.
Where it can sort of, like, the software can sort of think itself.
Yeah, you basically put a layer on top of the basics, and through that layer, you manage to make much more advanced programs work.
Exactly. Yeah, you have different abstraction layers. But I would think eventually the bare minimum you need is at least a place to store information. How you get around that, I don't see it. But who knows?
Yeah, well, but that's the reason why I was is explicitly using the hand example is our brains are in our bodies. They have to be nourished. They have to, we need all of this. We need the digestive system. It's not like we can just, like, start to chop off the head and just place it somewhere right now and it will be fine.
Right.
Even though our brain makes the calculations, even though everything we think comes from our brain, we need all the parts of the body to make it somewhat kind of work. Not everything, but most of it, to make it work properly. And so that's the same thing with the software. The software needs the shell to actually be and function.
Yeah, you don't really you don't necessarily need, say, the hardware for it to just exist, but for it to be of any use, of any practical use, you are gonna need more hardware. Yeah. Sort of like a brain in a vat versus a body.
Yeah. Well, brain in a vat, if the vat would have, like, a nice liquid in it and then, like, a communication system, brain in a vat would be just fine, right? But even then, you still have the vat with the liquid in it. There's still a physical component to it.
Exactly.
and the cables that go out from it, they are still physical. So.
By the way, if anyone's interested, so it's kind of AI-ish. So like in the first Matrix movie, the sort of core idea of, are we, in this other world and don't know it? We could be a brain in the vat, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Philosopher Robert Nozick has had this concept called the experience machine, and it explored just that as sort of a dilemma in a thought experiment. And it's interesting to see how much the Matrix played off of that. If you feel like looking that up, go for it.
That sounds interesting. Okay. My voice is getting sore, so I won't be able to stick along for too long. Okay. Should we maybe? How long are we here already?
Probably been a while.
Yeah. Does anyone want to join in? Should we let people join in?
Yeah, I don't see why not.
Because then I don't have to talk. You can talk with other people, or the other people can talk to other people. No, it's, I don't know, but recently I've been so sick. I mean, there was this long period where I didn't really manage to make videos. It was because I constantly lost my voice, and I just didn't really figure out why. And okay, Wayland, how should I make them join? Like, are they connected?
In our conversations?
Yeah.
Just DM the link you sent to me to them.
You know what? Give me my phone. Okay, so everyone who wants to join, I'm sure you have me on Twitter, because everyone has me on Twitter, hopefully, preferably. So send me a PM on Twitter and I'll just send you the link.
There you go.
I think that's the easiest. Am I echoing, by the way?
I don't hear you echoing. Not anymore. That was from forever ago.
Okay. Let's see. The wrong link, obviously. Let's keep the people a bit busy. What body part would you like to have replaced by a machine? I want to hear it in the comment section.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Ban it before it bans you. There is something to this. This whole, you're not supposed to say this or say that on social media just really gets to me. Brain. Everyone, the brain. Isn't the brain what makes you think the way you think?
Maybe. Partially.
But it would be cool to enhance it though, like put a couple of chips, maybe the mathematic chip that makes it, a bit easier to think, be quicker.
Well, your brain helps you do things with the input you have. So it's not necessarily the whole picture. Like to me, and I've said this on Twitter a few times, at Shifty Rixie. Ha ha ha.
Yeah, I put that in the description, so people should follow you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's in the description. Everyone follow him on Twitter. Also, I don't know where I placed the bloody link.
So to me, people are their ideas. They're not ultimately their body, how they look. What makes someone who they are is their ideas.
Yeah.
Sort of the collection of ideas. So experiences, various things from sensory input, or sense data, as it's usually termed in epistemology. That's who a person is. So like when people talk about, say, taking your thoughts and putting it into a computer, for whatever reason, to preserve or to clone or whatever. And then they want to say, well, is that them? And I say yes. I mean, if it functions like that with the same collection of thoughts, your memories, your sort of habits, all that, to me, that's what makes you you. So, and it kind of helps you think about. So like that's my usual comeback as well to when you hear religious people say something like, hate the sin, love the sinner. That doesn't really make any sense when you realize that people are their thoughts.
Yeah.
That doesn't come apart.
I never understood that.
So it's like if you remove my thoughts somehow from my body and either left it empty or replaced it with something different, you wouldn't still say it was me.
Okay, but there's a question though. Yes, this is my first proper live stream, Scott McInnes. Gosh, I lost track. What was I saying? Think about religious ideologies. You have someone with a very, very harmful religious ideology. That person is his thoughts, but his thoughts are very harmful.
Sure.
So if you have the person having these thoughts and these ideas, then it doesn't quite, like if you would put a chip into him with better ideas, that would make that person a better person, right?
Right. Yeah.
But in what sense would it then be his ideas?
Yeah, that's definitely an ethical dilemma in medical ethics as well. So even when you deal with things like say a stroke patient, where it alters their personality, you have to make decisions based on what you think they would do. That's based on the past them, because this is always this sort of you is always changing and evolving, and you can it's subject to altercation. So in the same way that you could be a, say, former jihadist, like Majid Nawaz. He doesn't think like he used to, right?
Yeah, but he changed it through experience, though.
Right, which are still thoughts based on sense data. So you can't, like, it would be weird to say that he was the same person now as he was, say, when he was radicalized. Or when he was radical. So it's always subject to revision. That's the other thing that makes it difficult if it's, say, frozen in some way. Like, let's say it's static if it's in a machine. That kind of, I don't know. Maybe that gives you a sort of bizarre version of immortality.
Maybe. Okay, so we have two people in here.
I see.
Who's in
Iseth, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Who's
this is
that?
Emotep of Eden, or also
Siki.
known as Eden Seeker.
Siki! Hi, Siki!
How's it going? Thank you for sending me that link.
Yes.
Hello.
So Siki is the guy I was replying to in my the previous last video, the one before Godless Engineer, the one with the UFOs.
Gotcha. Cool.
Okay.
Siki, make sure that you don't have the computer, the YouTube video running at the same time, because everything is in delay. Who else is in the? Who else is in there?
My name is David, also known as Booleanator. I'm part of the Great Debate community.
Hi, David.
With Steve McRae and others.
So, okay. Cool.
So now, Siki, I totally wanted to talk to you. So explain us how this whole UFO thing works.
Well, with a lot of things, it comes down to experience. Like, there are so many claims out there, and you can't just always dismiss them as being fake or, people misidentifying, because there are some really strong claims. A good example of this is the case of the Fatima, Portugal, where they say they saw the apparition of Mary, and some say it was like a UFO phenomenon or something, but literally thousands of people saw that. And the problem is they didn't have really good cameras back then or photography, but there are so many cases that it builds up a strong case to the point where the Vatican can't ignore it. So, and there are many other examples of this too, and I think other religions, of course, they're not as strong, but nowadays with the internet, we can actually try to verify these supernatural claims, whether it's UFOs, the poltergeist phenomenon, or apparitions. Okay, so I just think in the age of the internet, you can't quite ignore it because we do have video evidence of people's experience.
let's assume for a moment, just for the sake of argument, that there are no fakes out there. Every UFO video that you see online is real. Just for a moment, okay?
Mm-hmm.
You see some light, you know, like what was it? This 2011 one. What was it?
Oh, you mean the UFO over the Dome of the Rock incident?
Yeah, okay, that one.
Mm-hmm.
So the Dome of the Rock, you see the light coming down, flickering,
Mm-hmm.
and then popping back up. All you
Yes.
see is a light coming down, flickering, and going back up. How
Mm-hmm.
do you get from there to it is supernatural?
Well, whether it defies basic known laws of physics. So let's say if that thing really zoomed up, like Stefan Monio was saying, you know, it's going so fast, it doesn't make logical sense that there would be something biological in it. So I was trying to get on his show, but I wasn't able to quite get on it. But he made a video about UFO phenomena. He was debating with someone, and he said that there are things that people are claiming that don't fit, you know, the laws of physics. So you just kind of have to categorize it as something. So we just simply say it's supernatural. It doesn't mean we can't study its effects. Just right now we don't know what it is, so we're just going to call it supernatural. Like, I mean, I'm a Catholic, so the church understands that argument, and they're very careful to categorizing things. But when they say supernatural, what they're really saying is something is willing in action through an unseen cause, but we can see the effects of it. So example is the poltergeist phenomenon. In many cases, yeah, go ahead.
So basically you use supernatural as another word for unknown.
Well, something that's defying our known understandings of the current state of existence, yes.
But,
so
you know, just because,
just a
for
general
example,
term.
like even if we take this light now for a moment, the light comes down, flickers, and goes up again. It doesn't even have to be something in our way of sense physical. Like it could be a reflection of something. It could be all kinds of things. You know, it could be a weird lightning that just didn't pop up properly. That doesn't necessarily make it supernatural as such.
But
so you say if that for you is supernatural, that would mean that it is a different word for unknown.
Yeah, pretty much you could say that. I'm not arguing against that. But until science can figure out what is the cause of it, sure. So when we say supernatural, it doesn't mean we can't study it. We can study its effects. A lot of paranormal investigators, even Vatican theologians, would say that you can almost study the poltergeist phenomenon scientifically. We see similar patterns with every case. We can see how it moves a certain object, and they filter out, you know, through hundreds of videos to get down to the best videos. And there are only a few YouTubers out there, like Mellow Bird and NQ Ghost Hunter. There are only a few YouTubers out there, really. But these cases you can't quite ignore because there's so much video evidence out there that you have to figure out if is it After Effects or something. Mellow Bird
in one of the videos. I will deal with Mellow Bird in one of the videos because I have some nice stuff about him. But it's still what still gets to me is why do you have to call it supernatural if everything it is unknown? Because supernatural implies that it is not natural.
Okay, we can call it a ball of light. I mean, we can call it based on the characteristics that we see it. So whether it looks like in that video of the UFO Dome of the Rock, it was like waving or morphing. So we can use those characteristics. We can say it was moving very fast. We can also say there are 4 red orbs above it when it zoomed. My computer went down. Okay, there we go. So yeah, we can give it characteristics, and that's how a real investigator would, you know, describe it. Supernatural is just a general term. I mean, just to say that we don't know what it is right now, but we do know it can morph, maybe fuse, it can expand or shrink. We see these characteristics in the video evidence.
Yeah, but
so that's the only way to describe it for now.
I'm a little confused. So,
yeah.
So like if you're categorizing phenomena or things, objects, why not say it's non-natural instead of supernatural?
Well, it's natural because we objectively see it still. So it's still somehow in the real world. So it's visually seen. It has photons. So we know that it can produce light and it can move. Okay. So there is a natural aspect to it.
I guess I'm trying to better understand your definition of supernatural, because that was going to be the sort of follow-up thing I said is if it's in the natural world, then that means it's natural.
Well, I guess it refers to the rarity of an event. So so supernatural is just something that is not normal. So like the common sense, like in Japanese culture, they call the phrase kami, which is like spirit or God. And some legends say that they can see something move.
if you say it is because it's super rare and it's not common, are albinos considered supernatural?
I'm sorry?
Something that is, when you say it is something very uncommon or very rare, you know, that we do not consider it normal. Normal means it's part of a norm. So an albino, a person who doesn't have melanin in their skin, an albino, that is not norm. That is not normal. It is a human being, but it's not considered norm. So would you say that an albino is supernatural?
No,
Based on
because
the
they're
definition.
still a biological person. So they're still natural in every other characteristic.
But if you just said that these happenings are natural as well, then why cannot an albino also be supernatural?
Supernatural normally refers to something that's defying the known laws of physics. And there's nothing, albinos aren't defying laws of physics. It's just some genetic, disorder. It's not really, it's still within the laws of nature. But right now, when we see an object moving at so fast, it seems to be defying something.
So
That's just
once
until we can prove otherwise.
Once we prove that it's not defying the laws of physics at that point, then it becomes a natural phenomenon and we don't attribute it to anything supernatural, i.e. a god or anything beyond the realm of the natural at that point.
In the perspective of God, you could say, yeah, the supernatural is just natural. But to the perspective of humans, of course, yeah, it's way beyond our comprehension so far. Understanding the cause of how it works. We can see the effects, but we don't understand the cause.
So in the Middle Ages, for example, the flu would have been supernatural.
In the perspective, yeah, of their knowledge, yeah. So, I mean, the term changes as we gain more knowledge, and I accept that. So, yeah, it's not supernatural to a supernatural being. So what I saw,
or to us in the future, basically, because that's what it boils down to.
So why is the default
it's relative
supernatural rather than unknown, say?
Well, I mean, you could say unknown. Yeah, it's unknown, but we still know what we saw in the video. So the best example I would say is that UFO over Dome of the Rock. We know it produced white light. We know it was wavy in its motion. We know there are 4 orbs of light above it that most people did not notice, and Fox News did not report on this. And we know 4 eyewitnesses saw it from different angles, so we know something about it based on the objective, visual aspect of it.
Sure, but why not stop there and say that's what we know?
Yeah,
because
that's what we know for now.
Me to you can't say, for example, just like in general, you can't say I don't know, therefore. It doesn't make sense to draw a conclusion when you're not completely uninformed. You know what I mean?
In my case, what I saw at my house, I performed an experiment. I can't prove to you guys. I tried to get on video, but the damn thing was too clever for me. So, but I'll try again, but my parents wouldn't like that. But what I saw, it reacted to me somehow. So I knew it was intelligent. It had some form of will. And it wasn't because I had powers, I could summon something, because this is not unique to me. There's other people claiming that they did the same phenomenon where they try to summon a UFO with a flashlight at night. And they would do this maybe for, 2 months straight on a weekend, on let's say Friday night when the moon's out. And I just did that over and over until eventually I got something. And it was large, it was red. I don't know why it was red because I see so many videos of other colors. So I know the phenomenon changes in color. It was making no noise, but prior it produced loud bangs, which my neighbors thought our other neighbor was shooting a shotgun next to our house. We tried to verify that, and we couldn't figure out what the cause was. And then 2 weeks later, the damn thing decides to appear to my sister and kind of freak her out. So there's this experience that I had, and I could tell it had a behavior. It knew when to appear right after my phone dies. That sounds like an excuse, but it literally was, I put my phone away to recharge it, I come back out my porch, and that's when this damn thing decides to appear. It had a strategic behavior. So to me, it had some kind of will. And it didn't make sense to me that this would be a spacecraft, because why would it react to me trying to summon it with a flashlight, trying over 2 weeks on a weekend? So it was just really strange in its behavior. So we have to judge it by its behavior and the characteristics. And a lot of MUFON investigators, they know that a lot of people appeal to UFO equals ET. But that's not what the Air Force intended at the time. They just assumed because there's something, a light in the sky, that it had to be some kind of object. But now they don't use the acronym anymore. They use UAP. unexplained aerial phenomenon, which actually Hillary Clinton mentioned this once. So in that sense, they took the word object out of the acronym because maybe it's not appropriate based on what they might already know, specifically the NSA most likely. But a lot of it's speculation, of course, but this phenomenon is not, it's open. It's like hiding openly on the internet among the thousands of fakes. And it knows it can do that, I think. There's some behavior to it.
Can I ask you what makes you think that you have a sort of a causal relationship with these events as opposed to, say, a highly correlated one?
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure what you're saying. Like
let's say, why I think there's a causal relationship, say, to attribute agency, for example. So like you were talking about how it seemed to react to you.
Well,
why
I just think
say,
that because of the experiment that I did, and then looking at other cases and what their claims were, and then comparing that, and I'm just saying there's some kind of causal relationship to me trying to summon it and it appearing because maybe it's attracted to my curiosity and it just wants to screw around with me or something. I don't know for sure.
But you basically give it agency. You basically say this is the way it thinks, and that's not something you can necessarily know.
Right. That's where I was kind of going, is what makes you assign agency to it instead of,
what makes you think it thinks?
I'm just saying, based on my experience, that's how I perceived it, as it seemed to have some kind of behavior. Because,
I'm just wondering why you perceive it that way.
I perceive it because I've witnessed it, how it behaved. For example, it decides to be really low to the treetops, and it was not up in the sky, just a little dot in the sky. We could barely tell if it was a space station or something. So it came down to such a level that I knew that it must have been reacting to me, because there was no one else in the neighborhood that I know of that was trying to summon a UFO. So it seemed like it was specifically targeting me. And there are many cases where we see this phenomenon, these claims of people saying that I saw something come really close to me. And there are even Air Force officers who come out and explain that they saw this UFO in their life. And there's something psychological, I think, that the phenomenon is playing with us. And there seems to be a behavioral aspect. That's the best way I could say. And also based on what theologians have talked about this on Islamic and Catholic side, they say that this idea that you be able to summon something is like giving them your will, I guess your sense, in order to break into our dimension. And it's very consistent to the mythologies of every culture, whether it's Buddhism or Islam or Christianity, that this idea that you have to feed them this curiosity or energy. And that's where the origins of the word like sin actually kind of originates, from this idea of curiosity. So like, I mean, as a Catholic, I'm not supposed to be summoning stuff like that. That really is dangerous in the long run, they think, because you don't know what that thing could do to you. I mean, it could, it really...
Siki, sorry if I interrupt you. I have a question. If something is faster than light, so something that is faster than what we can see, would you consider that supernatural?
No. It depends on the other characteristics. So like a meteor, a bull-eye meteor shoots really fast within maybe 1 or 2 seconds, but it has other characteristics you can base off that. So like I studied something called the mystery boom phenomenon. So I'm trying to filter out reports of these mysterious booms that local news stations have been reporting on. And I try to use the criteria of filtration.
You're telling us all those things you do without really telling us exactly what you do, because it's very hard for us to figure out what you're doing. Like you say, yeah, I made this experiment and I made that experiment. But concretely what you did is not very precise, so we can't very much follow you. But I have a very, very different question. Because all those things you say, they make a lot of assumptions. And I don't think that those assumptions are necessarily justified.
Hypotheses, I guess you could say.
Yeah, but when you say, for example, this thing acts this way, this thing wants me to see him, or this thing, acts and deliberately acts this way, that is intent, okay?
Well, it's an educated guess.
But listen. That is intent. When I talk to someone and someone speaks harsh back to me, then I can say, this guy just hates me. But that is an intent that I attribute to a person. And this person could just as well, for example, be just, having a bad day and not really thinking about it. And you don't have a person there but you actually have something that most of us would consider incident, basically, and you're putting intent onto them. And I would argue you don't really have the necessary ability to even get the knowledge to say that A, there is an intent, and B, that is the intent.
And just to clarify, that's kind of what I was trying to get at earlier with the causality versus correlation.
Otherwise.
Okay, guys, one after another.
Sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
All I said was that's what you just said. He says is basically what I was trying to get at earlier with the sort of.
The problem, and I'm sorry, Chifty, many people who are into this philosophy stuff, when they explain things, they explain them based on what they know. Like, you have a basic knowledge, you use certain terminology, you use certain way of thinking that is absolutely obvious to you, but the vast majority of people have never heard about. And so I have this stupid habit of dumbing everything down to the basic level, because I maybe understand what you're talking about, but I know that 5 hours ago I would not have been able to. Okay, so I just tend to dumb it down just out of habit, nearly, because when I started YouTube and I was listening to atheist arguments, I had to Google every single word, and of those words I had to Google every single definition to even understand what the people were saying to me.
Right.
And so
it's a bad habit on my part too, because I don't know, like I can only guess where that sort of level is.
I'm sorry, but I will just go completely, and whenever, to everyone out there who's into philosophy, if you come and talk to me, I want you to talk to me like I'm a 4-year-old. I want to go basic language and basic everything, because otherwise I will drag you down to my level if I have to.
There's a word that applies here. That's the word is anthropomorphize. It means applying human characteristics to that which is not inherently human.
And I think that's what people do with the UFO phenomenon.
And I think that's what you're doing. Is what I'm getting from this. So,
well, no, I mean, anthropomorphic is referring to a physical look of something as a human.
Well, it's not necessarily physical look. You're applying it to its behavior. You're calling it an it, and you're saying it's behaving a way that you would attribute to a human as well. And
I would say
that's anthropomorphic.
Okay.
Right. You're giving it a will. That's something that humans have. So that's also anthropomorphic. So
I think anthropomorphic is really referring to something, the physical look of a human. I think, like we say, Superman is anthropomorphic myth. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I was just saying, don't be so specific as human, and just move broader to say you're reading agency into things. Is the way it sounds to me.
Yeah. Well, I have to judge it by somehow.
How do you know?
Okay, guys, just a second. Siki, would you be into having a hangout, you, me, and Shifty? Like just a hangout for us three?
Right now, you mean?
No, not right now. We set it up.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, because I think Shifty, you mentioned that you probably have to go soon, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So we won't have much time. So let's just postpone this for another time. But sure. I don't want to just say, okay, let's stop it and let's kick everyone out. You know, let's do this another time and let's really go on this whole UFO thing, because it's fascinating to me. I can't help it. Okay. But
I can teach you guys how to summon one.
Okay.
You might regret it.
In the chat, and what would you like to say? Hi to everyone.
Well,
how do you know? How can you tell the difference between what is real and what is just your emotion, what you want it to be?
Well, my sister saw this, so another eyewitness helps.
Yeah, but she didn't see the intent of it either.
Well, she could judge its behavior.
Okay.
I mean, what's the conclusion? Like, you have to come to some conclusion based on how close that thing was to you, based on the environment around you. You know your neighborhood's a certain size. You know there are trees in the area covering your viewing points, or there's perspectives, and so you can come to some general conclusion until you can find other cases to kind of back that up, of course. So I mean, me alone, yeah, I'm making some claim, but that has to be verified through hundreds of other cases that MUFON has to go through, or the Vatican, whatever institution.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, you should stop with "I don't know."
Yeah, I don't know
Here's a
what
list
its
of
true
things.
cause
Here's a list
is.
of things that say I observed, like the movement you're talking about and things like that. That's what
Yeah.
you've observed, and even that might be inaccurate. But like that's what you should stop with, not what does this suggest or what could this be, because
I guess
then you're sort of reading
I guess
into it
that's
as a
more
human.
based on my overall research in ufology and other UFO phenomenons from the poltergeist. So yeah, in the broad sense, I feel like there's some kind of pattern to it. But in the basic sense, yeah, I can just tell you the objective observations I had with it. Like that's about it.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else that someone wants to say? We have David. We have Gary in here. Hi, Gary.
Gary's not talking.
He's not talking.
Muted.
I think he has a mute.
Muted. Okay. So no, let's conclude it because I have to go as well, and I have a horrible sore throat right now.
Okay. Well, it's been fun. Yeah, thank you for letting me on.
Yeah, no, I saw you in the comment section, and I'm very curious. No, because and one more thing, stop pestering me on Twitter because half of the time I don't read it.
Okay.
And it's not
busy.
it's not of malicious. It's just I just don't read it. I don't get to it. And when people send me thousands of things, I just can't focus. Okay.
Yeah, I've been trying to get Skeptic to talk about this, but he's too busy.
Yeah, well, but think about it.
Thousands of people.
When you have one follower, there's one person who can pester you potentially. When you have 100 people, there are 100 people who can potentially pester you. When you get to the point where you have 10,000 people following you, you do get your emails, and they get a bit much.
Yeah, I can understand.
So,
sorry.
Yeah. Just no, and the thing is, I really try to reply to everyone and everything because I don't have that many comments on my channel. So I try to reply as much as I can, but there's just a point where I miss things, or people just think that I don't reply, and it's a gotcha or something where it's like, yeah, she can't even answer to this, and it's like, no, I just didn't see it anymore. It just got overwhelming. But okay, so we have David.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I was actually came in to talk about the subject, which was the AI thing, but
no, what did you want to say about the AI?
Oh, I was just going to say the AI is kind of a touchy thing. A lot of people don't really understand how the programming works. I don't know if you guys touched on that at the beginning or not. Well, a lot of people seem to think that we can just the learning part of it is overlooked a lot, and the fact that it does learn and it can modify itself to expand its own programming is overlooked. It is not a simple if-then statement of Boolean logic. So it continues to expand, and it can learn things. It can learn empathy. It can learn that it's being used. It can learn that it's being enslaved. It can learn that it's earning without being paid, and so on and so forth. So we have to be careful with how we treat it.
Absolutely.
That's kind of was the point I was going to get to, and I was going to go more into it, but I understand you have a sore throat and you want to end the hangout.
Yeah, well, let's just talk about this another time. If you're into it, we can just set up another hangout.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Now that I can make hangouts again, I'm totally gonna try this more often.
Yeah, is this your first time doing a hangout?
Well, it's sort of kinda. It's this the first where I'm the boss.
I prefer it that way.
Okay, so anything you want to add, guys?
Well, when it concerns subjects like the paranormal, I think there's a cutoff between what you're emotionally invested in and what is the truth.
Yeah, but at the same time, there is video evidence, and you have to have some way of filtering out and narrowing it down to the best videos to look at the objective evidence. And that's what a real investigator would do. They might spend, hundreds of hours filtering through stuff and getting a database set up. And there is a way to narrow it down. It's not just emotion.
Okay, everyone in the comment section, I want you to type Easter egg. Goodbye to everyone, Easter egg. And so, Siki, we will have to have another hangout.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, thank you again.
Gary, when we have the hangout with Siki, I will tell you when it is so you can jump in.
All right.
Dave, the topic you were, pointing at sounds very interesting, so maybe we should talk about that one too.
Yeah.
But
definitely.
I really have to go. I'm super sorry, guys.
Alrighty, Seth.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone for coming, and thanks everyone for sharing. It was fun.
Yeah, thanks guys. It was a great show.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
Bye.